Good morning, everybody. If you can hear me now, clap once. If you can hear me now, clap twice. Hey, that worked yesterday too. All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the third and final day of the Collective Impact Convening. I hope everyone got a great night of sleep after a long and very rich day yesterday. I'd also like to give a especially warm welcome to our local community partners who are joining us today for the first day of your experience with the Collective Impact Convening. So wasn't yesterday amazing? Thank you, yes. With our opening from Marshall Gans to our deep dive learning sessions, if you're anything like me, I imagine that you found the day to be thought-provoking, inspiring, and challenging for our work in thinking about what to take forward coming out of the great lessons that we heard yesterday. And not to fret, we have more great learning lined up for today. So I'm going to actually show a brief slide of today's agenda just to orient people to where we're headed. So we're here this morning until about 10. We have a great session lined up. Then we'll take a break, have one more round of deep dive learning opportunities, and then come together for our final closing session. For those of you who are just joining us today, just a friendly reminder that most of the details about the program are actually in the conference app. There are details on the little stand on your table how to download it, but we just want everyone to know that that's where you can find details on the sessions and the speakers for all of our sessions today. So before we turn to our morning panel, it is my pleasure to introduce our artist for the morning. As with other mornings, we are delighted to have a spoken word artist to help us open our minds to a different type of engagement. So Melissa Levada Oliva is a spoken word poet living in Boston. Her poetry tries to capture the feeling her parents get when they meet someone from their home country and the feeling she gets when she's late to a party. She is a National Poetry Slam champion and a Brenda Mosey Video Slam winner. Please join me in welcoming Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa. Thanks for holding this space with me. Here's a poem. If you ask me if I am fluent in Spanish, I'll tell you my Spanish is an itchy phantom limb. It is reaching for words and only finding air. My Spanish is my third birthday party. Half of it is memory, the other half is that photograph left on the fridge, is what my family has told me. My Spanish is a puzzle left in the rain. Too soggy to make its parts fit together to look just like the photograph on the box. My Spanish is, are you up yet? My Spanish is, there is a lot of work to do today. My Spanish is on my resume as a skill. My Spanish is on my toothbrush in red mouth marks. My Spanish is so hungry. My Spanish reaches for words at the top of a shelf with no stepping stool. It's hit in the head with all of the words that have been hiding up there. My Spanish wonders if it's bad to eat words that are expired. My Spanish wonders when it has an expiration date. My Spanish asks you why it's always being compared to food. It's spicy, hot, sizzle. My Spanish wants to let you know it is not something to be eaten, but does not really believe it. My Spanish sits in the corner of a classroom, chews on a pencil, never raises its hand. My Spanish is my sister's sore smile at her only beauty pageant. My Spanish is a made-up story about a parent who never came home. My Spanish is a made-up story about a parent who never came home but traveled to beautiful countries, sent me postcards from all of them. My Spanish is me, tracing every letter they were able to fit in. My Spanish is true story of my parents' divorce, chaotic, broken, something I have to choose to remember correctly. My Spanish is asking me if I'm American, asking me if I'm white yet. My Spanish, if you ask me if I am fluent in Spanish, I'll try to tell you a story of how my parents met in an ESL class, how it was when they trained their mouths to say, I love you in a different language. I hate you with their mouths shut. I'll tell you how my father's accent makes him sound like Zorro. How my mother tried to tie her tongue to a post with an English language leash. How the tongue always ran stubbornly back to the language it had always been in love with. Even when she tried to tame it, it always turned loose. I'll tell you, my Spanish is understanding that there are stories that will always be out of my reach. There are people who will never fit together the way that I wanted them to. There are letters that will always stay silent. There are words that will always escape me. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Melissa, for kicking us off. That was fantastic. So at this point, I will be turning to introduce the moderator for our opening session, Collective Impact, What's the Business Case? Tynesia Boya Robinson is the president and CEO of Reliance Methods. We're lucky to have Ty, a true cross-sector leader, host our opening session this morning. Ty's experience as an entrepreneur, Six Sigma Black Belt, and technologist uniquely positions her to catalyze a results-driven era of social change. In her previous role as Chief Impact Officer at Living Cities, Ty was responsible for ensuring $100 million of investment produced outcomes that improve the lives of low-income people across the country. She speaks frequently on the topic of cross-sector leadership and recently published the book Just Change: How to Collaborate for Lasting Impact, in which she shares her experience investing in cities and leaders across the country in order to help readers understand what's working, what's not working, and why, in order to improve their own communities. And so with that, I welcome Ty up to the stage.
Is my mic on? Can everyone hear me? So as I walk up to the stage, I'm going to invite my panelists, but we've all just decided that no one wants to follow the poem. You just had a wonderful poem about Spanish, and we're going to follow that with some really exciting corporate conversation. So, but that said, we'll do our best. But I'm going to ask everyone to come to the stage, and as they come to sit down, I just want to give a little bit of background. I've been really excited about being able to talk about private sector at this conference. It's something I've been writing about for over a decade now, and it never seemed to quite fit in our forums. And actually, Kim, who's sitting next to me, a year ago, she and I were sitting at this conference, and we said, you know what, we need to do a little bit more to get the private sector conversation, what the challenges are, what the strengths are of that as one of the cross-sector partnerships engaged. And so over the last year, we worked to try to make sure that we expose a little bit more about what was happening with the private sector. I also want to do a really quick thing. Folks who know me know I like to do interactive. So if you are from the private sector, please stand up in the room. That is a huge improvement from last year. Hey, I didn't say sit down yet, because there's one more thing I'm going to ask. Now sit down if you are in a foundation. Okay, so this is part, thank you, now everyone can sit down. This is part of why we wanted to have the conversation. So I want to make sure that you know this is not going to be about throwing rocks or roses. We are not trying to flambe anybody on the stage, but we want to make sure that we are giving a very honest and candid conversation for those of you who are engaging in private sector partnerships in your cross-sector collaborative or just starting. So I'm going to start with introducing folks first. We've got Kim Fortunato to my right. She's the Director of Community Affairs and the President of Campbell Soup Foundation. It's okay if you clap after each person, because they're fabulous. Then we have Keisha Cass, the CEO of the Impact America Fund. Alok Deshpande, the CEO and founder of Smart Path Financial. And Daniel Campos from Bank of America Corporate Affairs. So we are talking about the business case for collective impact, or as I like to call, why come we don't see anybody from the private sector on our cross-sector tables? And what we're going to start with is actually an opportunity. So I know that in the room there's going to be a variety of folks. Some folks are like, you guys started the problem in the first place, and we don't even want you at the table. You don't have to say that. I'm just going to maybe put that out there in the audience. And then another group is, you guys have so much money, you should be giving us a lot of money. So this is going to be someplace in the middle. I will say the opportunity, though, is, FSG has been investing in private sector work, particularly through Shared Value Initiative, for a while. So this isn't new for FSG, it is new for Collective Impact, so we're merging those two. But the other opportunity is, I'm not sure if you watch the Super Bowl or watch those commercials, but I will never forget on the Super Bowl this year, this is a commercial about Stella Artois, a beer company. And Matt Damon was talking about it. And once I stopped being distracted by Matt Damon because he's very attractive, he was talking about Stella Artois as a water conservation company. And I was like, when I'm at the bar, most of us aren't talking about water conservation when we're drinking Stella Artois. But the opportunity is that there are more and more private sector companies coming to realize that doing well and doing good can be a competitive advantage. So with that, I want to start off with Kim, actually. With Danielle. So Danielle, many collective practitioners feel that the private sector doesn't even understand why they should play an increased role in the private sector. Do you agree with that?
Actually, can I say no?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I actually would take it from a different approach. And Danielle Campos, hail from LA, so it's 5:30 my time. So thank you, Ty, for being so energetic, because I'm like, I'm ready to go. And I've been at the company for over 20 years. And I always say, well, hopefully people think I started in the high school internship program at Bank of America, but I did not. And I've been at that table in many of those 20 years, talking about cross-sector collaboration, talking about neighborhood impact, talking about shared success. And I would say that inherently, the private sector understands the why, but it's the how. And as we've looked at the environment and the environment we're in, it's about how are we going to do it differently, because we've had traditional approaches. Philanthropy, we still talk about our philanthropy and volunteerism, but it's the how we work together better. How do we look at different solutions to bring to the table and get invited to the table again, right? Because to your point, we were at the table and then there was a period where no one wanted us at the table, but people need to invite us in because we have other things to bring to that table beyond the check, beyond the people, subject matter expertise, lending, investing, capital. So I think, to your question, the answer is no, but we understand it, but it's the how we approach it that's changing and the dialogue that we're having. We can talk about ESG later, but we can maybe say that for another question. But even in that vernacular, from CSR, when I entered, I was philanthropy. Then I became a CSR program manager, and now I'm an ESG director with the foundation. That role changed 6 months ago. I said, what the heck is ESG? I know that, am I going to start investing in institutions now? But no, it's about the collective and how we talk about ESG in the company, because there is a collective impact within the company that we're at the table with lines of business talking about this integrated approach and how we impact our communities through our ESG approaches.
So for those of you who are like, what is that alphabet soup? CSR is corporate social responsibility, and ESG is environmental, social, and governance. So speaking of soup, Kim, haha, like what I did right there. Danielle was talking a lot about all of the different ways that her organization has been investing in trying to do collective impact, but you have been taking it a step further at Campbell's Soup. Would you mind talking about the leadership that you've brought to investing more in collective efforts?
Sure, thanks, Ty. And Danielle, you're so on point. I would say that traditional corporate philanthropy we have also at Campbell Soup with the Campbell Soup Foundation, but I was fortunate to be invited to join the company about 7 years ago to create a signature philanthropic program for the company, and was given $10 million in 10 years to reduce childhood obesity and hunger in Camden, New Jersey by 50%. So the best thing that happened after being invited to the company to do this great work, and really humbling work, I might add, in our city, was the publication of the SSIR article on collective impact. It happened almost at the same moment as I was hired, And in reading that article, I thought, bingo, this is how we're going to do this work. My background is as a lawyer, but has been in philanthropy, and particularly venture philanthropy with the social venture partner model, which I co-founded in Delaware. So it made great sense to have this cross-sector collaboration on such a complex social issue, really multiple issues, in a city that is very fragile in terms of infrastructure. So we started this program with a collective impact approach, with a methodology. So Campbell was the funder of this work, but we also played the backbone role until about the past 12 months. And my colleague Val Galarza is here in the audience. Val is now running Get Healthy Camden, which is a citywide collective on health. And we're in the midst of transitioning a lot of the backbone role that existed in my office to a community-based organization. We're funding that. We're funding capacity building of that. But we've been really fortunate to have buy-in from the top. So our CEO, Denise Morrison, speaks shared value. She's dedicated to the work in all of our communities, understands collective impact, and truly endorses it as an approach to the work that we're doing. And as I was charged to scale this program across our footprint, and originally thinking how, with not a lot of resources and mostly not too much human capital, really what we've scaled is the framework of collective impact. So we're investing in our other communities, in existing collectives, or investing in seed funding to start collective work in our other communities.
Well, and I think I saw Shanae Harris in the audience as well. And so Shanae is from Prudential, but we're seeing that a lot more in corporate philanthropy, investing more in the collective impact efforts, the infrastructure. What does it take to actually operate collectively towards outcomes, which is a shift. I would also say, I think there's some Minneapolis people in the audience, and there's a whole group called Itasca in Minneapolis. That is a collective impact table of private sector players on what's their role. So we've talked a little bit about the Fortune 500 companies, but I think one of the things that's another opportunity is there's a rise of businesses that are for-profit for good as well that could align. So Alok, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background and why you're interested in outcomes and social change?
Sure. So a little of my background. So spent all my career actually in corporate, so I feel a little out of place here. Nobody throw anything. But I left Bain & Company in 2010 and started teaching personal finance. We hit a recession where people in the community that I had grown up in were disproportionately affected. And so with that, I started with a classroom of 6 people and then grew the company to where we do financial wellness programs and more importantly, we do financial coaching for individuals. And one of the things that we've learned through this process is that a lot of the attention, at least, and I can only speak to our space in personal finance, which is a lot of the attention is given to let's educate. But there is still lukewarm results on how education correlates, financial education actually correlates to results. Instead, we've taken the position that, well, what if we could just give everybody an advisor and make it very affordable? And that has worked out really well for us. And so the idea of somebody who makes a majority of our clients are corporations and businesses. We work with call center operators, janitors, people in food and beverage. We just give them somebody to help them make better financial choices so they effectively have a coach. And we found that the traditional thinking is let's educate the environment. That actually didn't work, and so we shifted into the coaching side.
Wonderful. So if you guys believe our esteemed panelists, which I think they seem pretty trustworthy, not only is there a business case for collective impact within private sectors, but you have willing partners who are ready to do that. So the question is, how do you take that willingness and move it towards something that has outcomes? So we're going to shift now and just assume goodwill, assume good intent, that we have private sector partners. So let's say some examples. So I'm going to give Albuquerque a shout out because Albuquerque, I believe, is in the room as well. And Albuquerque has been working to increase employment. It has 10,000 jobs in their city that are actually landing in a way that has ethnic, social, racial, and economic development goals. But private sector is one that would be a huge partner in that. So Keisha, tell us how your investment strategy, the way that you run your work, is actually leading to economic growth. And give a little bit about what Impact America Fund does.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Impact America Fund, we are structured as a traditional fund, but we are proudly an impact investment fund in that all of our investments must have an inherent, what we call an inherent social or economic mission. As that company scales and generates more revenue and more profit, the goal is to also scale that impact. And the way that we look at our investments is a little bit different than you would see in sort of a traditional or more mainstream, I think, impact investment fund at this point. Our goal is to help expand the narrative around what does it look like and what does it mean to invest in underserved communities in America. So our approach is believing that there is existing infrastructure that needs to be enhanced. Market transparency is a big issue in underserved communities, affordable products, goods and services of quality. So believing that we can invest in companies that leverage the existing infrastructure, have a good understanding. What we like to say about our founders is a cultural competence around the community, the neighborhood, the actual need, the willingness to pay for a product, which is important if you're building a for-profit business. So we're investing believing that there is overlooked opportunity and potential in neighborhoods, that the infrastructure is there. There are booming economies when you look at underserved communities, but unfortunately in the case of, you just think about diversity, Silicon Valley, venture capital dollars, they're not, 9 times out of 10, are not being invested by people from that neighborhood. So it's very easy to overlook an opportunity. So we take the approach of, can we aggregate as an investment fund capital to then deploy and invest in founders who have this cultural competency about the community, and by investing in businesses that have an intention, which is very important to us, an intention to transform community, then you see this very nice, hopefully, I know it will not be linear, but trickle down or trickle up effect, depending on which way you look at it.
Do you have an example of one that you think the room could benefit from learning more about?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the companies that we are proud investors in, it's a company called Maven. And Maven is based in Oakland, founded by an African-American male who is extraordinary. He has his MBA, he speaks Mandarin. For 10 years, he imported and exported various products as sort of what he'll say his business hustle was. And landed on this opportunity to empower hairstylists in the community, recognizing that African-American hairstylists in particular, they don't inventory product, and we will not get in the weeds as to why, but there are cash flow issues, et cetera. So what does it look like if Maven, right, inventories that product, creates online space for these hairstylists to sell that product direct to their consumers and then receive a commission check each week from the sale of that product. And what's important about that, if you grew up low income or no low income people, an additional $100, $200, $300 a week is significant. I grew up low income and that was extremely significant for us. And so what's happening is that this company, Maven, is empowering hairstylists with the opportunity to make additional income, and we're seeing all sorts of other impactful benefit that's coming from this company. Long story short, we were earlier investors in the company. The company has gone on to raise capital from some of the largest traditional venture capitalists in the world, and is scaling quite rapidly as a company that does not necessarily self-identify as an impact or social entrepreneur company, but what's inherent in that business model is as that company grows, it's inherent that these stylists will generate more income and lots of other positive externalities from the work that they're able to do through being partners with Maven.
Wonderful. And I gave Albuquerque as an example because when you work backwards from what does it take to get to 10,000 jobs where people of color in communities that are often overlooked are not invested in, what are some of the barriers? And one of them was actually the culture of entrepreneurship, that communities of color, at least in Albuquerque, believed that when they heard entrepreneur, they weren't talking about them. They weren't talking about their communities. And things like hairstylists, other groups like that normally aren't looked at as traditional entrepreneurs, but you have investors like Keisha who are investing and looking for those opportunities. So that is a great example. So let's shift from 10,000 jobs and say I'm a community like Newark, for instance, who has a work about all children being healthy. When you think about health and children and education, you don't necessarily think of Campbell Soup, Kim. And I think some folks would say that they think that this is just a branding exercise. It's just another example of companies trying to get branding recognition for doing work in the community. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say that I hope that folks are coming around to understand that the private sector can be a force for good. And indeed, many of us, my colleagues from Bank of America, and many of us are truly dedicated to do good in our communities, believe that doing good is a direct result to our bottom line. In fact, there is data that demonstrates that. And to be honest, Campbell Soup Company is about to celebrate our 150th birthday. We've been in Camden since 4 years post, post end of the Civil War. I think in our own way, we've given back to the community over those 149 plus years at this point. And it's iterative how we impact our community. As Danielle talked about ESG, and we're all shifting to looking at impact. We realize that traditional philanthropy is not necessarily the answer to these complex social issues that we're dealing with. We are integral to our communities. All of corporate America is. I think looking at the Milton Friedman 25 years ago, thinking about our only responsibility is to our shareholder is no longer the case. We don't operate siloed as private sector corporations. We are part of our communities, we're part of our community's fabric. We know that we have a responsibility to our communities, to our environment, to our employees, to our consumers, our customers. So I think that I'm optimistic that there is some faith in the private sector among our population that we can be a force for good, that we are a force for good. We at Campbell are very focused on our purpose, real food that matters for life's moments. We have a real food philosophy. We have core values that support that philosophy. Real food should be accessible to all is part of our real food philosophy, and we are very mindful about access and about healthy foods and healthy foods at affordable prices. So I would suggest that certainly our Healthy Communities program is not a branding issue. In fact, our name's not even on it when we're in our schools with our partners, and it's really our partners who are driving this great work. The Food Trust, one of our partners, is here as well. So I truly believe that we are part of the solution. And as Danielle said earlier, we don't necessarily know how to do this work. So inviting us into the conversation, encouraging us to be a participant, to leverage our expertise, which I think is far more valuable than the dollars we have, is all something we are willing and able to contribute.
So since you mentioned Danielle a couple times, I'm going to look at Danielle. So we had talked about ESG, environment, social, and governance. So I know that Merrill Lynch and Bank of America recently put out a report on exactly that data. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that, what the data is showing about why companies are moving towards impact and not just shareholder return?
Well, I think you're closer to the data than I am. You probably know the numbers more than I do, but bottom line is that Merrill Lynch, our global research group, did put out a study December of 2016, and essentially it says the title is ESG equals good companies doing good, or was it something to that effect?
Good companies can make good stocks.
Okay, good companies can make good stocks. Thank you, that's right. And essentially it said that most of the bankruptcies and the volatile economic forces that are out there were the reason behind that were companies were not focused on ESG. We're not looking at environmental, social, and governance factors as they deployed capital, as they worked in the community. So one of the things, not only as Kim said, you know, or as Keisha, sorry, you know, we're not only investing in organizations, we're investing in companies, but we're actually asking shareholders to invest in us. So we have that commitment to our shareholders, our stakeholders, our employees, but if we're not practicing our own ESG or using our own ESG framework, shareholders won't invest in us either. So as we thought about for the last couple of years, we've done some real strategic work around how, as a company, we're going to embed ESG into our framework. And we've even, actually as we think about collective impact, we now have a National Community Advisory Council that comes and tells us how we can build responsible products, informs us, educates us more on how we should do this work. So ESG, I know hopefully you'll have a link to the study. There's data in there, there's percentages of why companies have failed, why the economy has been in distress for the last few years. But I would think that ESG is something that is, again, will help be a force for good.
Yes. Well, and I'm going to pick on you a little bit more, but long story short, when you open up that report, it has a whole bunch of numbers in it with lots of graphs, and basically it's like, oh, you shouldn't hurt the community if you're trying to make more money, because that doesn't work. So that's the cliff notes on it. But I will say that, Danielle, I'm not going to pick on you too much, but coming from the financial institution, you started off with, you got to the place where people didn't want you at the table.
Right.
How are you overcoming that skepticism now as you're working to do well and do good, particularly around things around workforce development?
Well, I would say, absolutely, there was mistakes made. And it wasn't just the financial institutions, it was, I think, everyone. And Alok's point about educating after 2010, we also had to get better at educating our employees, our communities, on the types of products that were out there. So we've created Better Money Habits. I don't know, Alok, if you're familiar with Better Money Habits, a free education program online, so that if you're having issues with personal finance, you come in and you can get on the website, quick learning. We've created, we support financial coaching for a while, and have invested in organizations and initiatives that look at how we can bring and actually meeting people where they're at, right? And then you talk about the workforce collaborative piece, and we actually have funded collective impact work, and through the actually Jobs for the Future, the Opportunity to Works initiative, we're funding the national landscape, but also the local market. We have local markets, and Bank of America, I mean, we are in 1 in every 2 households. So if we don't get this right this time around, it's not going to be good for anyone in society. So we are literally looking at how we do our business, how we run our business, and the types of products, and making sure that we grow responsibly. And that means helping local communities thrive, be good citizens, et cetera.
So growing responsibly, I would say impact investing, I'm coming back to you, Keisha, is very sexy right now. Everybody wants to talk about impact investing and pay for success and all this stuff. But when folks in the community talk about impact investing, it's supposed to align impact and outcomes, but folks have said it's been shorter on the impact. So how do you balance the financial and social return when you're trying to drive outcomes?
That's a great question. And I think as the space evolves and the companies that we've invested in and others mature, we'll see how we manage it. Our intent is to invest in companies that their revenue, by the nature of who they're serving, their customer base, and what their product and service is, their revenue and profit is really dependent upon the beneficiary, right, that we are hoping to make an impact on. So in the case of Maven, the hairstylist, if Maven does not treat its hairstylists properly and understands that they're a key stakeholder, if that hairstylist chooses to not partner with Maven, then that breaks Maven's business model. So it's tough. It's a tough trade-off. I think the one thing that we are learning and understanding is we can't be all things to all people. And so for the example of Maven or an ed tech company, Schoolzilla, that we're invested in, what is the primary mission that you are striving for? And it may not be that the company is using solar panels on its roof. The point of Maven is to increase economic opportunity and income for hairstylists, and being very focused on that mission. So I think, again, we'll learn as these companies scale, but not the biggest learning or takeaway so far is not trying to be all things to all people.
So speaking of not being all things to all people, Alok, you and I had a conversation, and I said, why aren't you involved in more collective impact efforts if you care so much about social change and mission in the community?
Well, the first time I heard about it was from you. So, you know, and when we had this conversation, I mean, just to be candid here, you know, it sounded to me, and it may not very well be the case, but it sounded to me like this is going to mean that we're going to have 8 or 10 people sitting around a table, and we're going to talk about a problem for a long period of time, and then we're going to go off and we're supposed to go do stuff. When our perspective is, and I think that could be very effective in certain situations, our perspective is that, you know, we try to keep meetings to 10, 12 minutes max and just execute.
Oh, wait, that sounds like nirvana. 10 to 12. I can't remember a collective impact meeting that was ever 10 to 12 minutes, but
yeah, we time our meetings and we keep them to 10, 12 minutes and then we go. And we do, because we can learn a lot more by doing and working with customers and working with people than we can ever learn in a room and discussing it. And so my concern was is forming consensus in a group of lots of different perspectives while very much ideal, like that's kind of where we want to get to and start to, especially in a collective impact mission where you're focusing on outcomes, that's great. But from a standpoint of a small business, we're just trying to execute and execute and execute. And over time, the business adapts to what the needs are of people. I think from our perspective, it really takes strong leadership and the appropriate investors that are in your business to be able to keep the mission front and center. Because you can, and I can give you an example so that people understand what I'm saying here. In financial services, for a company that offers credit cards, if I were to go out and offer credit, we don't sell any products. If I were to go out and offer credit cards to our users and our clients, we will make anywhere from $200 to $500 per credit card application. $200 to $500. That is incredibly enticing to say, well, why don't I just show a lot, like here are the top 3 credit cards that you can have, and somebody signs up, we get $200 to $500 for every single application. It's a very complex problem, but if you don't have strong leadership, it's very easy to fall into, well, where is the money? And so from our perspective, it's, you know, with collective impact, to your original question, from a collective impact standpoint, we would love to get perspectives and opinions from different groups. But we're pretty laser focused on how do we drive impact for our specific users.
And so when you talk about being laser focused on impact, one of the things that you were talking about is that you have clear data on the results and outcomes of your approach. Would you mind sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's for us, it's pretty straightforward. We can work with somebody and look at their credit score, we can look at their savings, we can look at their debt, and we can look at, on a month-to-month basis, are they spending less than they make? And we kind of look at those 4 metrics. And we can see across the board, savings rates go up, debt go down. And it shouldn't be too, and from our perspective, this shouldn't be surprising because you have a coach sitting with you. It's like if you're going out and doing personal trainer, you're gonna get a better workout with a personal trainer than you will doing it on your own, at least for most people. Financial services is a complex space that I think this group can really have an influence on because just by the nature of, if you look at Bank of America or Wells Fargo, all these there, if you look at their 10Ks, you look at how they actually make money, it is counter to what we think about in terms of impact. You know, you drive money off of interest income. And so it's just this weird space of how do you kind of work with banks and financial institutions without being predatory to consumers, with also making sure that you have growth. And Bank of America and Wells Fargo, quite frankly, are in everybody's retirement portfolio. So if those don't do well, you won't see the growth. And so it's an incredibly complex problem to solve. But from our perspective, you know, we just look at results of the individual, and you wrote this in your book, which is just start with the individual and show the results, and then you work your way out from there, whether it's through organizations, through how do you change systems. If the individual is demanding different things, the systems will adapt to meet that.
So Kim, you have probably one of the most unique experiences as a private sector backbone leader. So one thing is time, and I think all of us would like to have fewer meetings, so that will probably be the takeaway. The other is data and making sure that there are outcomes that show you really are driving results and it's people driven. But what were some of the other challenges or interesting barriers that you had to overcome as a private sector backbone leader?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. We were, and perhaps still are, the only funder and backbone organization, collective organization in the private sector. And to put it right out there, we get that there is a power imbalance, that we're writing the check and also leading from behind. We're very much servant leadership based in our backbone leadership. But to be honest, 7 years ago, in looking at these really complex issues in Camden City, which is, as I mentioned, a pretty challenged city, although on the rise, we didn't see partner availability that could support or even had the will to do this type of work. So we did it. And we, I think, had the opportunity as the backbone and the funder to do it with perhaps a bit more expediency, to get partners to the table. I think your comment, Alok, about consensus is interesting, because collective impact isn't leading by consensus so much, except that there has to be a commitment to that common agenda and to work together, to work collectively. And we were able to drive that, and that was one of the benefits, quite frankly, about being the funder and the backbone, was to set out that criteria and to say to partners at the table, you know, if this approach, this methodology of working collectively, of sharing metrics, of having constant communication and mutually reinforcing each other's activities, if this doesn't suit your style of how you work in the public sector or in the community, that's fine. You don't need to be part of this collective, really. And indeed, while our view is long-term as a 10-year program, and our funding is long-term, the funding actually is re-upped annually because we are constantly reassessing our process, it's iterative, and the commitment to the collective. So there have been 2 occasions where that commitment hasn't really been true. I think the partner was in it because it was Campbell Soup Company and it was a lot of funding, but the commitment to work collectively wasn't there, and that partner didn't continue as part of the collective. So it's really this intense commitment, not only to the goal that you've set forth, and in our case it's the health of our communities, but it's the commitment to work collectively across sectors with partners at the table who you would never suspect to be your partners, and to really be open to unanticipated outcomes and the things that do bubble up in this collective work. So being able to drive that from a corporate perspective has been, I think, a very positive, it's certainly been a positive learning internally for us at the company, but I think it's also provided the framework for what is now a community-based collective, Get Healthy Camden, that will carry on this work in a broader and deeper context, which our smaller Campbell collective will now be a part of.
And one of the things you had mentioned early on in that work was a language disconnect as the company, and Danielle, you can pop in on that one too as you're nodding, as the company tried to get more and more involved in outcomes work. How did you overcome those language challenges?
I think we're still working on it. I don't know where Val is, but Val would probably agree. We're still working on that. And to be honest, we spoke about this 2 years ago in New Orleans, that we speak different languages. We operate on 30-minute increments. We operate with objectives and agendas and outcomes and what is expected deliverables. And the nonprofit sector has a different language that they speak to, and we need to understand one another's languages, not just the nonprofit sector understanding how corporate operates, but also corporate understanding how our nonprofit sector operates. So that's a continual learning, and as is this collective work. I try at our monthly meetings to always reiterate what is collective impact, the why behind collective impact, the why behind Campbell Soup being intentional about collective impact. So I think the language is something that all of us have to work on continually.
Danielle, you were nodding vigorously.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, the language has changed for all of us for the work that we do. And collective impact, Melody was talking about collective impact yesterday, and she said, well, collective impact is really the framework. We've all been doing collective impact for some time now, whether it has been, again, direct investments, sitting at the table around cross-sector collaborations. And what we've learned is, you know, funding, community development, affordable housing, education, workforce development, hunger. We went steep in the hunger space, partnered with organizations like Campbell's on a hunger coalition, is that it's not just those one things, it's the integration of all that. And so even as we think about our approach philanthropically and working with communities, is when we talk to a nonprofit, okay, great, you're working on workforce issues, you're trying to get 1,000 kids into jobs by 2020. who are the other partners in the room that you're working with? I mean, you have to have your affordable housing partners there. You have to have those organizations that are providing wraparound services, because not one organization can solve that solution alone or the problem alone. So that's where I think integration, integrated approaches, comprehensive approaches have come to the forefront, and those are, to me, collective impact models. So the vernacular, is changing, and I think, honestly, nonprofit organizations, those working in the space, are coming to us with that more education around, we don't want just the money, we want to have your shared expertise, share your expertise with us at the table. So that, the dialogue is changing, whereas opposed, we did 10, 20 years, 15 years ago, we did a backbone. It was called American Block by Block. And we were 4 communities, Bank of America centric, we're the ones funding, we're the ones doing this, and brought those partners to the table. And again, the reason was, let's pool our resources together in a meaningful way and we had that 10-year commitment as well. And at least when we were done with that 10-year commitment, we found that we were able to facilitate the infrastructure of the conversation that wasn't taking place. And in these neighborhoods, if you go there, you still have these partners who are working together, talking together. I'm like, okay, we've done our job. That was the reason why we did this. So we've all tried these models, and we're all willing to learn more and look at collective impact as a meaningful way to get to solve problems in our communities.
And so I think you've heard Kim, and I mentioned it a little bit in the beginning, shared value. So shared value and collective impact around the same time started being popular as terms of a lingo, and shared value is almost the exact same thing for collective impact, but private sector driven. And one of the things that way back in the day, I was a mortgage bank integration manager, and the first thing we did when we went to Mexico to buy this bank was we looked at the roads and the schools and the government, and we knew that you had to invest in the entire ecosystem if you were going to buy this bank and be profitable in this bank. And so a lot of the shared value, when you look up those examples that started a while ago, were international, because large companies were investing in all of those things when they left the United States, but they were taking for granted at the United States that those things were still going to happen. And over time, that's why the ESG reports and things have been important, because it's shown that you can't, you can't continue to ignore or assume that what's called the business commons is going to flourish. You have to continue to invest in our local infrastructure, which I know some of you folks here will be like, yes, and why did we need to wait 10 years in a report for that? But it is shifting the behavior in companies. So I want to go back to you, Keisha, because one of the challenges, for instance, Detroit, when they went through their bankruptcy, and New Orleans also is another example after Hurricane Katrina, there was all this money going towards those communities, but it was still hard to get those dollars to land in a way that drives impact. And I think people understand it a little bit more when you're a financial institution, what's driving those challenges. But what are some of the challenges to getting your capital to even land in communities that you care about and that could have change?
That's a big question. I don't have the answer to that question. But I will take a step back and talk about the sort of the beauty, I think, and we're still, everyone's trying to figure this out, of impact investing, is thinking about, how do we solve and address these issues that everyone in this room, thinks about on a day-to-day basis, but bringing together various partners. So one of our partners, one of our investors in the fund, is Prudential Financial, and they have made a commitment to impact investing. And we also have the Cerna Foundation and some ultra-high net worth family offices. And I say that to say that it's beautiful to see, a public financial institution, a foundation, a high net worth individual collaborating and collectively coming together to address some of these social and economic issues that we've been grappling with and will continue to grapple with. And so, our approach, or at least Impact America Fund's approach, is can we leverage really the capital markets? Can we leverage venture capital and the model around innovation and thinking outside of the box, right? How do we think about education and what are some of the root causes of why we're not seeing the teaching outcomes that we'd like to see? And for us, we're invested in a company, Schoolzilla, that's making it easier for school administrators and teachers to aggregate and gain insights from data. And so initially, the thought process is this an impact-oriented company? You're not really giving a child a book to read. How does data impact the teaching outcomes, right? So looking again at that infrastructure, and our approach is to find good partners. Our partners think we're a good partner to invest in our fund, and then we go out and look for and identify and partner with great entrepreneurs who we believe can grow, really big companies that can have significant impact. And our process and criteria for investing in an entrepreneur, checking all the diligence boxes in terms of it being a great business model, great opportunity, great management team. But what's particularly interesting, I think, about our approach is that we are, in some ways, analyzing that entrepreneur's ability to create significant impact in that community based on their lived experience and their understanding of that community. So our approach is a bit different in that, again, it's let's try something different. Can we use for-profit business models and treat this as a sustainable business that has long-lasting impact, right? And it's not dependent upon, no offense to grants, but it's not dependent upon constant fundraising. Can you create a model that is self-sustaining and that ideally a large corporate partner could buy one day and that becomes integrated in really authentically from the ground up into their business model?
And so the reason why this is important, if you were running a collective impact effort, let's take Baltimore, for instance. One of the things that they were looking to do is to increase employment, particularly amongst African Americans in Baltimore. And as you worked backwards from employment as your outcome, one of the big barriers to success they had was that there was a large number of people who were past adjudicated. There was a large group that had criminal background checks. So what did they do? That one, they worked on policy change, so they did ban the box. But two, they started to see research that said entrepreneurs, particularly people of color, are more likely to hire other folks of color, but also be more open potentially to background challenges. And so is there a way to tap into a market there? Well, even if you wanted to, you'd have to have money that goes to it. And traditional financial institutions often found that a little scary. And so you needed other capital. Grants, they tried grants, but as Keisha was saying, grants aren't sustainable long term. So what's the market solution where having entrepreneurs helps people who are past adjudicated find employment? If you don't have capital going towards those businesses, though, they won't be able to scale and grow, and so you won't get to the employment. So that's how you work backwards and where the dollars come through. So I'm going to open it up to questions because we've been talking a lot, and I feel really, really bad for the people in the back. And I want you all to kind of be able to come in and talk a little bit more to the folks. So I think there's mic runners running around. Robert. So if you want to ask a question of the panel, you can just raise a hand and someone will come and bring a mic.
Could I just
Yes.
some comment here?
Yes.
On the impact investing space and then also on the court involved. I mean, that's a place, or I should say an issue that we're really honing in on from a social justice standpoint. And going back to Keisha's point, high net worth individuals. I mean, we're being asked by our U.S. trust clients, our Merrill Lynch clients, to come up with funding vehicles because they want to invest into social good, right? And so we actually partnered with Robin Hood Foundation and others at the table and brought clients to the table to invest in an organization called CEO, which is the Center for Employment Opportunity. So when you talked about court involved and impact investing, I mean, here's where we're driving capital and resources to an issue. And it took a lot of work because, we had to work hand in hand with this organization to look at those and create those, what those outcomes and data would be as we, to get the return on those investments for our shareholders and our clients. So anyways, I just wanted to connect the dots on that.
No, absolutely. In fact, it reminds me of the 3 trends, 2 of them that are in the report and one that you just said. One is that millennials are actually pushing the market really hard. So one of the reasons why companies are looking more to do well and do good is that millennials are actually, one, wanting to work for companies that are purpose-driven, so it's driving their talent base. But 2, you're seeing more and more people paying a premium for products that show that they do well and do good. So if you come to the table with a really strong collective impact model to be able to show those outcomes, you're actually helping the business's bottom line. But the third piece is now that there's several $1 trillion of wealth changing hands with investors, and the investing market is looking for things that do well and do good. So it's putting pressures on companies. So wonderful man with the mic in the back. Do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And actually what you were talking about is related to my question. I actually come from decades of working in manufacturing and automation, so I'm one of the people that have the language of a private industry. And when I hear about ESG and I think about it from a corporate standpoint, the question I have is, you have all of these amazing individuals that work at your companies, and where do the employees fit in, and their power and their energy, and how does that fit in ESG?
I'm happy to take that. I'm happy to share with you all that it was released yesterday that Campbell, both on our human relations side and on my team, the community affairs team, is partnering with a startup company called Imperative, which actually has data measuring an employee's feeling about his or her value and purpose, and how that impacts your productivity, your retention. And we will be doing parallel work with Imperative on purpose, and training purpose-driven leaders throughout our employee base for their own internal leadership experience, and also purpose-driven leadership for the work in our communities. So really doing a deep dive on what purpose means, and trying to afford employees opportunity for purpose, not necessarily community work, but purpose in their day-to-day, and how that will impact them. So I'm looking forward to reporting back maybe in a year, and really answering that question with what is the outcome of the work that we've done around purpose and affording people purpose in their day-to-day lives. I know so often, and particularly our millennial employees, especially those who are new to the company, will stop by my office and say, you guys do such cool work. How can we get involved with this work that you do? And it doesn't necessarily mean building community gardens. It might mean helping support our new backbone organization with marketing expertise and communications expertise. But really, how do we add value to the day-to-day of our employees' lives? And I believe that this purpose work and the cohort that we're part of will have some of the answers and some of the keys to unlock the answers to that question.
Yeah, when I think about employee engagement, you naturally go to volunteerism. And so volunteers, we have a strong volunteer core, and we give our employees 2 hours a week to go out and volunteer. But when we think about ESG and talk about ESG in that framing, it is around our purpose is to make the lives better for the individuals we serve, financial lives better for the individuals we serve. So how do you connect that purpose to what they are doing out in communities or doing as part of their daily jobs? And we have built out a cohort of what we call Better Money Habits champions. And this overwhelming response to, I want to be a champion in my community, in my day-to-day, and how do I do that? So we've built out training. We talk to our champions. We surface up opportunities so that they can help deliver better money habits, be those financial mentors that you guys were talking about, to their communities, to their schools, to their employee base. So that's one of the things that we've done in the last couple of years, is really build out some structures and strategic initiatives that our employees can engage in meaningfully.
Hello, Keisha. When I think about that question, it leans more towards a Fortune 500 model, but since both of your companies have both social and financial missions, do you feel that your employees are looking for separate opportunities, or do you think that they're finding both just by working day to day?
Yeah, in our sector, at least in our space, and especially with kind of small to mid-sized startups and kind of up to 200, 300 employees, I think for us, they find the mission in what we do. That's just part of the hiring process. That being said, if they have other, things that they want to be involved in, then they go do that. I mean, the one beautiful thing of the startup community, from my perspective, is that there's not a whole lot of FaceTime, and you need to be at a certain place at a certain time, and people just kind of, we have a results-only work environment. People kind of get things done, and that's been helpful. I mean, so I think people feel very free in our organization. I've actually seen some folks who do different things, whether it's through religious organizations or whether it's through their community, and I think it's fantastic. I mean, we don't necessarily go in and say, hey, we want to back this and support it, because we don't really have the infrastructure to do that. What we do say is that you use your time how you want. We need to drive results through what we're doing. And I think a broader point on, and as we were coming to the financial services side, which is, if I've looked at this stage tens of thousands of budgets of people who make kind of think of after-tax income of $1,800 a month, $1,500 a month. So these are relatively lower income, and that's a tough number to live on in a lot of places. And some of the things that have had the greatest impact on their lives are businesses like Uber, right? Where we say, hey, if you go out, and we've seen people literally go out and earn an extra $500 a month because that was available to them. Now, Uber does not position itself clearly as a social impact organization. I do understand this. I get it. I don't want people yelling at me here. So, yeah, they don't. They don't. Neither does Fiverr, neither does eBay, neither does any of these tools. But these are fast-growing, fast-scaling, ways for folks to, what I call, instead of jobs, but make full-time equivalent money. Because I think what we're going to see in the future is this is not about creating jobs. This is about how do you create a set of different sources of income that get you to $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 a month, so that you have some opportunity to build wealth, especially with the advent of automation in many of the jobs that we're talking about. So from our standpoint, when we look at like social impact and what organizations have impact, what organizations are trying to drive impact, it's not necessarily the ones who are saying they are trying to do that. It's the ones that have the structure and the systems to create opportunities for build money, at least in personal finance. It lends itself to so many of those. I mean, you can rail off lists of them, but there's so many of those that do not talk about themselves as social impact, but have a significantly bigger impact than organizations in our community that say they're doing social impact.
And I'll add to that and say that intentionality is important, and that our companies are much smaller than the Ubers out there, the Lyfts, and other larger companies that are having some impact, and we can argue as to why. I don't necessarily agree with the economic stability of some of these companies, but the culture of companies that are intentional about their impact, employee retention is much higher. And Maven and other companies we're invested in, Maven was just nominated as the top, sort of in the top 25 small and medium businesses in the Bay Area. And within the dialogue that the interviewer had with employees, it was really, a lot of it was related to the culture and the mission of that company. So we're hoping that impact investing invests in and grows up with companies that do have more intentionality around the impact that they're having. So when those tough decisions come about, where there will be a trade-off, hopefully it's in the best interest of employees and the communities that they serve.
I think there's a question back there.
I'm really encouraged by the sort of commitment to doing well and doing good, but I'm also aware that a lot of times business practices or products are actually actively harmful to the communities that you are trying to impact. So whether that's unhealthy food or environmental degradation or predatory lending or fueling speculation in the housing market or resisting worker rights to organize, there are lots of ways in which companies work against the interest of communities. So I'm curious about how you all deal with those tensions inside your companies and how you deal with the tensions that are produced by that when you're working with community partners.
Shall I go first? Great, thanks. At Campbell's Soup, certainly, and especially when I first started with the company, I think the food sector was looked at as part of the cause for the obesity problems in our country. And I'm happy to say that, first of all, at Campbell, the vast majority of our products meet all the USDA guidelines for nutritious products. All of our recent acquisitions have been in the organic and natural spaces. So Bolthouse Farms is one of our brands. Plum Organics, which is a B Corp, an organic baby food company. We were the first publicly held company to acquire and then incorporate a B Corp as a subsidiary. We have a second B Corp, Soulful, which is a breakfast food company that is a Tom's Shoe model, buy one and one product is given to your local food bank. So our product line actually is very healthy. I know people think soup in cans is not healthy, but if you look at Well Yes, our new product, you'll see that actually, much to the contrary, very healthy products. So we are mindful of our products, and I think we have a very strong commitment. Health and well-being is one of our business strategies. So we have a very strong commitment to health and wellness, and really to lead as an industry, food industry partner, to really lead the field around health and well-being. Similarly, the impact, we're aware of what we cause, the footprint we cause as a company, and we respond to that. So in Ohio, we have the largest solar footprint at our thermal plant in Ohio, the largest thermal footprint in the state. Similarly, in the past week, we just announced the development of a solar field at World Headquarters in our parking lot, which will eventually generate the electricity for Campbell's Soup Company. So as a corporation, I really do believe that we are a leader in transparency in product development around health and well-being and around responsibility to our communities and to our environment. Yeah, we're aware of all of the negativity that is associated so often with corporate America, but I think we've addressed that in very meaningful ways, and indeed our reports in various indices reflect that.
Keisha, I'm going to put you on the spot on this one because this conversation came up in our prep call, and you started talking about the role of disruption towards those outcomes.
It's, the approach we're taking as a venture capital fund and investing in high growth companies, the opportunity, honestly and unfortunately, that we have is due to market failures, right? And that's financial institutions, large corporations, who are sort of missing the beat and missing the boat. Once you are kind of the 100-pound gorilla, it's tough to move. And where innovation comes in, whether that's a traditional sort of funded venture capital framework, or in our case, one that has this impact-oriented mission, there's room for, we're betting on disruption. And, but at the same time, a lot of our clients of some of our companies are large corporations, right? And so the corporations who get it, they're actively seeking out opportunities to work with innovators, companies that have new tech solutions, companies that have mission-driven components, and the venture capital space works hand in hand with those progressive corporations. So it's this kind of fine dance that we play in terms of disrupting and or identifying opportunity that's being missed by large corporations, and we're more agile and we're more flexible and we're able to move quicker, but at the same time being in partnership with those organizations because they are, they carry a lot of weight. So it is a dance that happens.
And I'm going to jump in here. So I'm going to pick a little bit on the banks here, so don't take this personally.
I said to Ty, I know I'm going to get it, but I'm ready.
Yeah, it's coming. So I'll be a bit provocative here because I thought that was a fantastic question. If you listen to earnings calls for large financial service institutions, and I'll pick on Wells Fargo as separately. All right, so good? All right, we're good.
Are they here?
No problem. All right, so you listen to these earnings calls, and so Wells Fargo has a foundation. Wells Fargo has social impact initiatives, CSR, all these acronyms. But Wells Fargo's core initiative that got them in trouble was the 8 is great, which is I need, on average, every person to have 8 accounts with our institution. Now just think about that. I'm in financial services and can't think of 8 different accounts I would need at a bank. Yet on average, I need that to happen. And so it started to lead to just a range of bad behavior, defrauding 2 million customers, so on and so forth. But at the core, when you step back and say, okay, these were all bad things, Wells Fargo. Get it right. Wells Fargo has to show growth on a quarterly basis. They have earnings calls, they have investor calls, and their stock price is impacted by what they show on a quarterly basis. to me, for the question that was asked, the fundamental problem that I think large corporations have is not that they're not passionate about impact and change. It is that it's very difficult to have a long-term strategy on that when you are held accountable to quarterly earnings. And quarterly earnings, I mean, people are going to move the needle on that stuff however they possibly can just to meet their numbers. And so I think as we think about all these issues on policy and how do we change the way things are done, one of the things we have to think about is at the level at which public institutions and public corporations, how are we measuring the results of these corporations? And I think it just creates a systematic problem that yields in across different sectors, not just financial services.
At the Shared Value Conference a couple of weeks ago, a quote that I loved was, outcomes is not about how you spend your money, it's about how you make your money. And that's the difference that this shift, if done well, will happen. There's some more questions. I see, Alok, you got lots of people raising their hands now. Microphones.
So prior to moving into nonprofit work, I was a lobbyist for an insurance company. And for as much as we wanted to do good work in the communities, it was very rare for us to actively seek out policy change to free up the space for us to do it. So could you talk a little bit about how you work with policymakers or with government in general in order to open up that space?
I can give a fairly local example of that. We are looking, food access is one of our key strategies in the work that we're doing. And in Camden City, a city of 80,000 people, we have only one full-service grocery store. In fact, I'd like to do some impact investing to bring another one in, Keisha. We'll have a conversation. In any event, for 15 months, indeed, in the city, there was no full-service grocery store. Our food system is largely comprised of corner stores, about 135 corner stores, and we've done a fairly large investment in creating a healthy corner store initiative with many of our partners who are part of our collective, and the Food Trust has led that. I think the Food Trust is here. As a result of the work that we did in Camden, we now are at 53 corner stores of those 135, and we've seen some outcomes that we expected around increased demand for produce, but we've seen some unanticipated outcomes as well, increased revenue of corner store owners. As a result of this investment, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation invested funds in 10 communities in New Jersey to create healthy corner store initiatives, which the Food Trust is leading, but also created a corner store task force, which is cross-sector task force of a variety of folks. And that task force has done a lot of study and ultimately went to the state legislature to get state funding, which we've not yet succeeded at, but we're still working on it, to get state funding to increase this corner store work statewide in a deeper, more meaningful way. So that's one example of how we as a private sector partner have been part of policy change around food access in our state.
And I can give an example from my background from before. So a lot of folks doing collective impact work are doing cradle to career initiatives, and once you get to the career part, it gets really messy really fast. Because you've got the college system and then the young people actually trying to get employed and then the private sector folks. And so when we were working on that effort, we realized that a lot of the funding streams, like Workforce Investment Act, don't align those partners. So what we did is actually brought the heads of those companies in with the young people who they were hiring and come together to say, these are the 3 things we'd like to see in WIOA. We'd like to see market-driven community college curriculum because community colleges are more affordable for low-income folks, and then the private sector folks will be accountable to helping make sure the curricula is there. We would like to see more of the community colleges funding or college funding going towards employment outcomes and not just whether or not they got to school. And so what was really effective, I know you had mentioned you were in government affairs, what was effective for us getting WIOA changed from those lawmakers was that we were bringing very unusual suspects, which you talk a lot about in collective impact. It was the young person on the ground being served and the head of the company both singing from the same song sheet. And so that had actually cut through a lot of the noise during that policy change in ways that we hadn't seen before. Other questions? I feel bad for the mic runners. This room is so big. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, good morning. My name is Allison Mendoza Walters, and I come from Prince George's County, Maryland, which borders the east side of Washington, D.C., and I work in food justice and maternal and child health. My question is, what advice do you have for identifying private sector companies to approach? And besides not talking too much and wasting their time, what pro tips do you have for approaching them with that first pitch?
I can take that. So as I mentioned, we're talking about the big gorilla in the room, Bank of America. We have a national strategy, but we also work very local. And actually, most of our, I'm going to talk about our giving, but most of our giving is at that local level. And I would ensure that you make sure you actually know your local folks in the community, walk into that banking center, that financial center, introduce yourself, but actually make sure that you know what the work that the bank and the community is doing in that organization. I agree that the challenges we have is you walk in and most organizations say, can you fund me? Can you invest in the company? It's more about, in the organization, it's more about how can you work with us, whether it's through volunteerism, whether it's through bringing your employees to an organization and sitting at the table and talking about solutions we can bring to the table. So don't come in with that, oh, can you invest in my organization? Come with, how can we work together and talk about how we can solve or address workforce in my community, like Maryland. And I think it's the dialogue and the conversation that's critical.
Yeah, at least on the fundraising side, I can speak to the fundraising process. We've done it for several companies, but and correct me if I'm wrong here, I think the saying is that when you ask for advice, you get funding. When you ask for funding, you get advice. So keep that in mind, that don't ask for funding. But one thing I do put people's feet to the fire anytime I'm talking to an organization, or generally in our world it's a VC or an investor, is to say, what would you like to see? What would be compelling to you in the next 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or whatever the time period is that would make you say, oh man, I really need to get in on this? And I think the same thing holds true in the social impact space, which says, what kind of numbers, what is it that you're looking for? So why don't you tell me the pitch, and then I'll go build it, and I'll go drive those results, and then we can start to have a dialogue. And I think those are very productive conversations for us, and hopefully it's helpful to you.
I'll give two tools that are in my book. So one is the results at the center exercise, where it's not about just coming up to companies and saying, can you work with us? It's what's the outcome that you're trying to get for children, for families, for your community? And then what are the private sector players that have a role in that? So first, screening by that. And then second, there's another exercise around the buyers that you have to engage to get private sector partnerships. So one, the champion, the person who is senior enough and has influence enough to be able to help navigate that environment. Two, the actual user, who's going to be the person who's most affected by the services. Three, the technical buyer, which is usually the person that can say no, but it's often, you have to meet these requirements and I don't understand how you're doing them, so that's the one. And then the fourth is the economic buyer, who is the person who has the financial decision-making and power over whether or not that works. Now, depending on the size of the company, those four roles can be in the same person, but I think oftentimes communities who are looking to engage folks, whether in collective impact efforts or others, get really good on one of those four buyers and get stalled out because they don't have the consensus within the organization for all of them. I see you in the back with your hand raised.
Hi there. I wanted to zero in on one thing that I think Alok said about if you focus on the needs of individuals, systems will adjust. And use that as a question, I guess, for the panel. I think there's a room filled with people here who are working against systems that haven't adjusted to the needs of people at the sort of bottom end. If I understand the Black Lives Matter movement, it's about Black Lives Matter movement. It's about systems adjusting to needs that haven't been recognized. So I wanted to find out from you all on the panel, what do you think is the role of business in challenging systems or people who are in power where their needs are being met, but needs for people, say at the the wealth at the bottom of the pyramid are not being met. What is the business case for that sort of what is the business case for that sort of role?
Ooh, that one's tough.
Yeah, I think
a
this
little
is a
bit.
little bit hard.
Yeah.
Oh, and
Gonna
it
reframe.
probably didn't help that I snapped in the middle because the room was all excited. It was basically, the paraphrase is, you had mentioned that the systems will adjust, but this room is functioning and pushing against systems that have been broken that actually haven't moved in the direction that improves the lives of people. So what's the business's role in actually helping change those systems as opposed to kind of passively assuming that they're going to adjust? Is that a good paraphrase? Would that work? Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like central to what the startup community is trying to do, whether that's kind of from an impact perspective or just in general, which is if you've got very few options, let's say in a community for financial services and or just basic banking, how can startups be able to create models that enable folks to do that? So whether that's simple online banking, no fee, whether that is figuring out ways and products to take somebody who's got a bad credit score, and we talked about this at dinner, which is somebody who has a 630 credit score, and be able to effectively offer them rates that are closer to a 740 without seeing any increase in default. Those are what innovators are doing in the space. So I can speak for the startup community, and you've seen it with Level and Even and Remedy, and there's kind of a whole range of companies. I would encourage you guys to go to the Center for Financial Service Innovation. They have what's called a Financial Solutions Lab. And if you type that in and you look at the companies that they've supported as part of this lab, it is unbelievable as to how much many of these companies will change the way financial services are done. So my perspective is obviously coming from a startup background, is that startups will help change these outcomes for individuals very directly, and then systems will follow to say, wow, we can't make as much money in the check cashing place, so we're gonna have to think about something different. So that's what we've seen at least.
And we're invested in a company, Camino Financial, that's providing basically alternative loan or lending to small businesses. And they're using really interesting data that banks just aren't in a position to use, or it's too expensive for a bank to make this loan. But they're using, social media data. They are looking at the business holistically, thinking about a small business. The entrepreneur or the person who owns the business is probably one of 3 employees. So do you pay your cell phone bills on time, right? How does that factor into your ability to pay back this loan on time? So there are these innovative companies that are emerging. That being said, Camino Financial is also working with larger banks to have the balance sheet to be able to provide these loans. So you're seeing, again, this innovation meets traditional systems, hopefully in a way, to answer the question, that pushes these systems along, that's more progressive and more impactful for the communities that they're serving.
I would just say I'm optimistic from a corporate funder perspective. Just coming from the Committee Encouraging Corporate Philanthropy in New York the past 2 days, talking about long-term corporate thinking around systems change, and a lot of us who are really anxious to be funding systems change and looking for the right partnerships to be able to do that. We're heavily invested in systems change work in our food systems, not only in Camden but in some of our other footprints. So I think there is very much a willingness to fund systems change work, knowing that a lot of our systems aren't working to serve the people who are in greatest need.
Well, and I would say that it needs agitation. That it doesn't have to be something where it's adversarial, but I think the pressure of outcomes for people and people of color and low-income people at the center of your work, bad behavior that's not moving towards those outcomes gets pushed on by the collective, or money and dollar flow starts to go towards things that are driving the outcomes, and that changes behavior. I think we have room for one more question. One more, Robert. Robert says one more. Who's going to be the lucky one question?
There's a guy in the back.
I don't know who has the microphone.
Yeah.
Can I just go?
Okay. Take it away.
Thank you.
I'm Chris Sturm from New Jersey Future, and I have a question about navigating relationships between multiple members of a collective impact effort, including the private sector. So we're trying to transform water infrastructure in New Jersey, and we've got great participation by private sector utilities and consultants and contractors, as well as environmental groups, community groups, regulators, because there's a lot of mutual benefit. But at the same time, as one example, we have a national environmental group who's sued the regulators, who's criticized the state of some of the water infrastructure systems, not wrongly, but we're having some trust issues and looking for some input on the panel as to how to navigate that effectively.
No, I was trying to think in terms of, yeah.
I mean, I take a stab at that, having been part of this collective for 6 years now, and trust is always an issue. And I guess if I were in your position, what I would do is bring it up and have that collective group discuss what are the issues that are causing this disruptive area around trust. Around the collective, because once that trust disappears, I think there's little hope for success. We also talked about this yesterday about trust and trust in our civil society and what's happening with trust. So we know that trust is fundamental to moving any agenda forward. So just as a practitioner of collective work, I think I would have to try to address it, maybe not as a collective at first, but try to address it maybe with a few of the individual stakeholders and then address it collectively.
What I've seen in the work is that the role of the neutral convener is really important in that. I've seen different examples where private sector is at the table for outcomes for employment or outcomes for investment with the public sector, and on one hand they're getting celebrated, on the other hand the public sector is pushing back on them on taxes or what their investment is, and it's the same people, and it's kind of schizophrenic at the table. And so that's where we've seen the importance of strong backbone infrastructure, strong backbone leadership, and investment in that collaborative and the cohesion of that group so you can navigate the turbulence, because it's going to happen. It's not black and white, and it's not clean, and so you only have the strength of that group towards the outcomes to make that move.
Yeah, I'm sorry, if I could just add the Kim piece. I was thinking of, I would take them to breakfast or to dinner or for drinks, you know? I'm sorry, I was like, should I say that now? But it is those one-on-one conversations. If you have a disruptor or someone who's creating tension in that group, you've got to isolate and have that one-on-one conversation and build that trust. And maybe it's not going to happen at the collective. It's probably going to happen in the backroom conversations or in other places to engage in dialogue.
Yeah, I wouldn't call them out in front of everybody. I tried that didn't work. So that will backfire tremendously. So I would be careful of that.
Well, I want to pull up, there's a resources slide that I'm going to pull up because we mentioned a lot of different articles and links. So I want you to be able to go to any of those if you want to. So the report that we talked about with ESG, also we talked a lot about shared value, so the ecosystem of shared value, and shows the interconnection between that and collective impact. B corporations, so this rise of for-profit for good organizations, and my book just changed, but I wanted to thank the panelists and thank all of you for muscling through with us this morning. And I know Sherry is going to turn it over for housekeeping. Next steps.
Let's give the panel another round of applause. Thank you for a great conversation. In case you forgot, I'm Sherry Brady from the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, and welcome to the last day. Hey. So just to let you know, the last set of 90-minute concurrent sessions will be starting at 10:15. Room assignments are listed here. All of the rooms except for the terrace room are here on the mezzanine level. And then we will return to this room at noon for lunch and the closing plenary, the future of collective impact in turbulent times. Thanks.